Now, I'd like to show you an interview of another gentleman that was really instrumental in me wanting to work with Immunotec. This is John Molson. Let's listen to an interview that I did 22 years ago with him.
John H. Molson tells us why healthy people and even athletes can expect better performance by using Immunocal.
Now, what we found with Immunocal is that it positively affects the immune system. In other words, it can reduce the incidence of upper respiratory illness in athletes. So what does that mean for the athlete? Well, typically athletes will get sick 2 to 3 to 4 times a year. And for a professional athlete, or for the owner of a professional team, that can mean lost dollars. So Immunocal can positively affect the team or the athlete by improving the athlete's immune system and thus less downtime. The second major criteria is recovery. We know for a fact that oxidative stress induces injuries to the muscle, thereby having muscle soreness after intense training. What Immunocal does is it ups the or increases the antioxidant quantity in the cell, thus regulating the injury induced by oxidative stress in the muscle. As a consequence, the professional athlete will be able to train more frequently at a higher level rather than having to wait for the soreness to abate. The third primary area is that of performance. And what we've seen with Dr. Lanza's work at the Montreal Children's Hospital was athletes taking Immunocal had a 13.5% increase in their performance versus no increase in the placebo group. Now, this is fairly dramatic if you think that races are won and lost by a matter of.
So when I interviewed Dr. Bunos and John Molson, I got to tell you, it really had an impact on me because they had already been working for years on this information, and it was very impressive to me. And I'm very happy to introduce John Molson to you tonight. First of all, John has been working with this for at least 25 years that I know of. And I want him to come on now. John, are you with us tonight?
Yes, I am.
All right, John, thank you so much for being with us. Now, there's a lot of people. By the way, John, I got to tell you, 22 years later, you don't look too much different from when I interviewed you 22 years ago. So that's a pretty good thing, let me tell you.
I think I still have that tie.
Yes, do you really? That's okay. Well, John, many people tonight have not met you personally, and the story is quite compelling as to what got you involved in the first place with Immunotec. Why don't you give us a little background on how you heard about this and what got you interested in really being a part of it?
Sure. Well, I was a shareholder of a company called Roberts Evergreen with Chuck Roberts. And through our lawyer, knew of a notary in Toronto that did work for Dieter Beer. And Dieter Beer had been looking for years to try and commercialize Immunocal, and he couldn't find the right partner. He'd gone down the pharma route. And so actually, an interesting story, one of the lead scientists for a pharma company had phoned Dieter Beer and asked him, were you able to do a deal with our company? And Dieter said no. And this gentleman actually asked Dieter to send him product for his mother, who was very ill. And he told Dieter, he said, don't do a deal with our company, go directly to the people. And so Dieter followed up on those words. And in 1996, we ended up meeting Dieter Beer and Dr. Bunos in Chuck's office. And after the meeting, Chuck said to me, one of us is going to have to learn the science. And so since he had more shares than I did, I volunteered to work with Dr. Bunos, and Chuck handled the sales and marketing, and that's how we started out.
That's a great story. Well, let me ask you this. How did you get a personal belief structure in the product? What was it that made you really know this was the real deal?
Yeah, that's a good question. I came from, I was involved in my family's brewing company. I worked for the Royal Bank of Canada, and I maybe took 2 or 3 biology classes in school, but I didn't remember anything about science. So when we first met Dieter Beer and Dr. Bunos, it was hard for me to fully appreciate what we had in our hands. And really what tipped the scales for me was I was still competing at a national level in sports, and Dieter Beer sent me a canister of product. I was an elite cyclist at the time, multiple Quebec champion. And I started taking the product, I believe, on a Friday. And by Tuesday, I could barely sleep. I had so much energy. And so that really convinced me that this product is something important. It wasn't a placebo effect. And, as athletes, we're always trying to find that advantage. And you try and take every supplement under the sun to try and restore your energy. And so lo and behold, Immunocal had this very profound effect on me. Dr. Bunos later explained to me, why that occurred. And it was really interesting because a scientist that we collaborated with many years later saw the same thing occur in his mice, which was really funny. Anyway, so that really put me over the edge. And as I tell my friends, I bought the ultimate action pack when I invested in the company at that time.
Well, I came along about late 1998, and when I met you, of course, the company was still small. I don't know, probably there was 10 or 15 employees there in the company, not the hundreds and hundreds of employees that we have today. But you particularly have been involved on the research side of this, and you've been involved with this for a couple of decades now. What has been your experience with some of the early studies, for instance, the LAND study that involved healthy young men?
Yeah, so that's, it's interesting because when you look at the history of Immunotec, I mean, this started out essentially in an academic environment. And so there was no commercial purpose to this. Dr. Bunos was trying to understand what this product did, and he was very fortunate to be in an academic environment because he had Dr. Kongshav in there, and he also had other academics who could provide other models for them to study. And when it was eventually commercialized in 1997, you understand that what regulated our ability to conduct business was the regulatory environment. And so you can't make a business or couldn't make a business in the functional food or supplement business by going into cancer and AIDS, notwithstanding the fact that we had that. And when I started collaborating with Dr. Bunos, he was very interested in my experiences in sports and fatigue and wellness and well-being. And so we spent a lot of time together, and, we discussed, I asked him lots of questions about his work, and he asked me lots of questions about sports. And so we started, we actually took the company in terms of a right turn into areas like sports performance. And I had this incredible experience with the product, and I had many friends that were elite athletes, and I was able to supply the product to them. And our first study confirmed what I felt and what a lot of our elite athletes felt, which is when we looked at this product in an academic environment, in a clinical study with a control, this product had a very profound effect on performance in young, healthy adults. And so that, again, when you talk about quality of life, everybody is an athlete, so to speak. Life is an active event. We move to do this, we move to do that. It doesn't matter what age. It's about movement. And so if you have something that can assist your physical strength, that plays a very important role, not only for athletes, but for quality of life. So that was the first study we did, which was published by Dr. Larry Lands and appeared in the Journal of Physiology.
And in it, what were the benefits seen with these young, healthy men?
So they took young, healthy adults in their 20s, and they put half the group on a placebo. And actually, to tell the truth, that the group that was on the placebo we used was a protein called casein, which is a protein found in milk. And it's not a true placebo. Actually, if you take casein, casein is actually also a high quality protein, and it will have an effect on performance. So the Immunocal group increased their performance by an average of 13.5% versus the casein group. And the casein group it's not a true placebo. There is a performance effect. So it shows you how dramatic that is. And it was a 13.5% in physical strength, in performance in these 20-year-olds. And also it increased glutathione by 35.5% in these healthy adults. And that actually is something that we don't really talk about, but that really piqued Dr. Bunos's interest and led him to look at other aspects of glutathione metabolism. Because as he said, if 20-year-olds who are supposed to be in the peak of their physical condition, if you can increase glutathione by 35.5%, and when you think about glutathione, it's very tightly regulated, he postulated that, because these are city dwellers, that possibly the exposure to environmental pollution may be decreasing glutathione in some way or having an effect on glutathione, combined with other things possibly in their lifestyle. But he found that very interesting, that we could get that kind of increase in young, healthy adults. You would expect to see that in elderly people, but not 20-year-olds.
Yes, that was outstanding. By the way, John, your face went out of focus just a little bit. There you go, popped in again. Now I understand that this type of study was revisited some years later with older people. You want to share what happened in that regard?
Exactly. So when Dr. Wolf Droog came from the German National Cancer Institute, we were very fortunate that he picked Immunotec out of many other companies that he was offered by. And one of the reasons he came to Immunotec was to continue his research. So one of the things he wanted to study was Immunocal in elderly adults. So we set up a study at a French university in Montreal and looked at Immunocal in 65 to 80-year-olds. And it's interesting because approximately, I think 65 to 70% of the study participants were women. And I asked the investigator, why that was the case. He said, women are more focused on their health at that age than men are, which, we can all take a good lesson there. Anyway, so what they found was that they were able to increase the physical strength in the study participants by a factor of about 10% in 65 to 80-year-olds, compared to, again, to the placebo group who were on casein. And again, the casein is not a true placebo because there is this effect, but everybody did the same exercise program for a period of 3 months, and we were able to generate that kind of effect. So that was really important because, again, if you look at the medical literature, physical strength in the elderly is really, really important. One of the things that Dr. Droog discovered and was an expert in was muscle loss. And this muscle loss, he says, can have very important effects on the quality of the aging process, because part of the aging process and where you lose muscle in unhealthy aging is in the legs. And that's why you see elderly people, you combine the loss of balance with the loss of physical strength in the legs, which contributes to falls and hips breaking and so forth. So it's very, very important. And, it was a finding that really pleased Dr. Droog.
Excellent. I can tell you, I don't know of an older person that wouldn't want that, quite frankly. I want to show you a few photos that and pick up where we left off. We already commented about those two studies. Now, I think it's very exciting what you shared with me about Aurico. Could you tell our listening audience, which is now around 150 people, by the way, it's gotten larger in the last few minutes, tell them what kind of a relationship we have and what kind of company this is.
Yeah, so I would encourage everybody to write down the word Oracle and look that up, because these people are some of the top scientists in the world in their field. And many, many years ago, probably 12 years ago, I received a call from a scientist who's called Dr. Nathan Lewis, who was working with the English Institute of Sport. And the group he was looking after were Olympic sailors, and he was very interested in inquiring about Immunocal, because part of what his whole field of study was back then was the effect of low antioxidant capacity in the blood of athletes and its effect on illness and fatigue and so forth. And he wanted to try and modulate glutathione in these athletes. And so he phoned me and we developed a relationship. And eventually Dr. Lewis was asked to join a company called Oracle. And Oracle at the time that we were collaborating with them back then had over 500 athletes across, I think, 10 different disciplines. And I'm talking, World Cup sailing, F1 racing, English Premier League teams, Nike Oregon Track Club. And so what Oracle did was they're using AI. Essentially, they work with IBM Watson, and they analyze thousands of biomarkers in these athletes, and they help coaches, professional coaches, to monitor the blood of athletes to make sure that they stay within certain parameters. If you think of a motor car engine is designed to run within certain tolerances. And if you get outside those tolerances, you can break the engine. Well, the human body is no different. And so these athletes, even though they're world-class athletes, they have the same kind of parameters. And so you can think of this almost like guideposts. And so they do analysis, and IBM Watson analyzes all these different biomarkers. And all this to say that they've keyed in on glutathione oxidative stress as a means to reduce the incidence of injury and illness. And they use Immunocal with all these different athletes. And so we've had a very important relationship with Oracle over the years, supplying them with Immunocal. And they've gone through multiple Olympic cycles with the English Olympic team. As I mentioned, we supply product to Nike Oregon Track Club, Tottenham Hotspur, professional golfers. And so it's been fascinating for me, because I've learned so much. I've seen what Immunocal has done in the clinical trial situation, but to actually have Oracle and, using their biomarker analysis, working with athletes in the real world, so to speak, has given us a really important perspective on the application of Immunocal in elite sports.
What are some of the current sports organizations that are working closely with Oracle?
Well, Dallas Mavericks is one. I'm not allowed to mention some of them. I think, Tottenham Hotspur, some top golfers. I think Padraig Harrington, and there's also NFL teams who they've worked with. But they've signed an agreement with the National Basketball Players Association, and it's all centered on providing these players with the tools to improve their on-court availability, so to prevent injury, but also to extend, the lifespan of their careers. And so they signed this agreement, and that permits these players to be able to use their facilities, use their biomarker analysis, and use Immunocal.
Wow, that's terrific. Well, what can you tell me about this organization?
Yeah, so way back when we started supplying product to Nathan Lewis at the English Institute of Sport, we didn't have a formal process by which to have the product analyzed. I gave it to my friends, and there was never any doubt in our minds about it. But then once we started, providing this to an organization like the English Institute of Sport, as well as these different Olympic teams, you had to get this product tested. So we set up a relationship, and eventually we set up a system whereby all Immunocal and all Platinum is tested so that you know, we don't have to get a special batch tested for the athletes. Now all the product is tested and approved, so we can send any box we want to these specific athletes. But you had to send a certificate with the product to the coach, and the coach would read the certificate, make sure there's no bad substances, then he would give the product to the athlete.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I'm going to show just a few pictures of some of these athletes. Any comments you want to make on the Olympic track and field team in rowing Canada?
Yeah, so again, we had a very important relationship with Rowing Canada, and we supplied product to their athletes. You can appreciate, you know, sports like rowing, especially the lightweight crews. You know, they put in incredible hours and, you know, high intensity work, and they have to keep their body weight low. So these guys are really subject to overtraining. So the product was used by these athletes to improve their resiliency and capacity to deal with the training. You know, as I said, Oracle went through 3 Olympic cycles supplying Immunocal, as well as actually our cherry juice to help them sleep, which unfortunately we no longer have. So we've again had relationships with multiple athletes.
Looks like some of them won some of the Olympics too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's absolutely. We had medalists.
Very good.
Yeah.
Now, what about this this gal Sally Kipyego and the British cycling team?
Yeah. So through Oracle works with Nike Oregon Track Club, and Nike Oregon Track Club, based in the U.S., has some of the top athletes in the world, and Sally runs for Nike Oregon Track Club. And so if you look at her frame, you know, she's a lean, mean machine. And the beauty about Immunocal is Immunocal provides, as you talked about, it's the top protein you can possibly have. And it's also only 40 calories per pouch. So what they're very focused on is power to weight ratio. You know, every extra gram you carry over 10,000 meters or a marathon, and actually it's a funny story, there's a very famous marathoner by the name of Frank Shorter who ran for, I think, the 72 Olympics in Montreal. He was a US marathoner. He actually filed his shoes down to save weight. So every gram is counted, and the beauty about Immunocal is it's only 40 calories per pack, so you can get that extra protein together with all the other benefits.
And this guy?
Yeah, and there's again Justin Warner. So again, you know, when you talk about power, Immunocal provides that, you know, based on our studies. So those guys, you know, when you talk about the difference between first and sixth, you can be talking about 1/10 of a second. So, you know, I call it working with Oracle, mining the minutia, because at that level, everybody's really good. So if you can find fractional changes, and if you think about it, you find the fractional change, and then you essentially add that fractional change over the course of a microcycle or macrocycle. So if we can improve recovery by even 0.1 of 1%, but if you take that over the course of a year, that's meaningful at the end of a year, right? And so that's the way to think about these things. And so if you think about Immunocal in sports, you're talking about the immune system, you're talking about recovery, you're talking about performance. If you add those things over the course of a year, it's going to be meaningful. And then, you know, if you take that example for a pro football team, pro soccer team, and now you're talking about in 21 players or 53 players, those small differences, that can be very meaningful.
Yeah. These two.
So here we have, you know, again, Mark Rowland, Nike Oregon Track Club, you know, the major championships down to 1%. He believes that the Immunocal. And this is something, I didn't coach that guy. We didn't pay for that. I asked, you know, I asked the head of Oracle, look, can you do me a favor and just speak with the coach and see if you can write something for us? And that's what he wrote, you know. That's not a placebo effect.
Wow, I believe Immunocal gives OTC elite athletes that 1% difference in their nutritional and recovery strategies. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And he
Because
points
it's, you
out,
know, with and you know, you have many athletes in your organization. You can make huge changes in your performance when you're starting out. But the closer you get to the top, as I mentioned, everybody's good, everybody's fast. And so that 1% is as big as the 12% down when you're starting out. You know, that's the difference.
what can you tell me about bodybuilders?
So Miriam Capes, again, she was a distributor early on. And so we offered to support her because, you know, she was involved in the Canadian fitness and she was very into health, nutrition, so forth. And so she was taking Immunocal while she was competing.
All right, very good. And how about this skier?
Yeah, that's again, this was something that came from Poland, and our Polish distributor, based on all the work we'd done in the sports, she took all that information and was able to interest Justina. And if you look at her record, I read some of her testimonials. I mean, she really responded well to Immunocal. So that's great to see.
You know, I had the privilege of giving the first seminar to, I was there along with Jimmy Gutman also, and we spoke to 250 doctors in Poland. And one of them was a sports doctor who took care of Justina.
Wow.
And immediately after the meeting, he went and called her and he says, I've found something you got to get on. And so she immediately went on Immunocal, and she became like a national hero, because I don't think anyone won the gold.
Exactly.
So she's as famous as it gets, and she always picks up her Immunocal every month. How about this one here?
Yeah, so we supplied product through a friend of mine to do some members of the Canadian national track and field team, and Krista was one of them. So she was on Immunocal for a while.
Very good. And
Yeah.
another skier.
And we also did work again, you know, through our distributor network. They bumped into members of the Canadian national ski team, so I was able to again supply product to members of the Canadian national ski team.
Yeah. How about the Ironman?
Yeah, and we supply product to Morgan. Also, a friend of mine was the world champion at the Olympic distance, and he took Immunocal and had the same kind of effect that I did. And he told me this funny story that when he was in France competing, somebody stole his Immunocal and all his allergies came back. He had a lot of airborne allergies, and he said Immunocal helped him breathe better. And then somebody took it when he was in France. He was really mad.
How about Robbie Wade?
Yeah, it's again another triathlete that we supported early on, amateur athlete.
Sylvan Adams.
Yeah, so he again multiple world champion, and he's actually now the owner of a team based in Israel, and they have Froome riding for them. So he did very well in sports and was a master's athlete, and so I provided the product to him.
Excellent. And John Grant?
Yeah, he's again came in through the network, a top lacrosse player.
I like that quote. He says, Immunocal saved my career. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, I mean, you know, lacrosse is a very rough sport. And so as you get older, you know, recovering from injuries, broken bones, things like that, it played a very important role.
Now, I met Desai in Boston along with you. You want to give us some background on how Desai figured in with Immunocal?
Yeah, so Desai was the coach of the athletes you put up previously, the runners. And again, it came in through our network, and so we offered to support Desai to help him with his runners. So over the course of a number of years, we were supplying Immunocal to Desai's group.
I remember him telling me in Boston that his group of runners prior to the Olympics were so-so, But he said after they were on Immunocal for some months, he said it just put him into a different class.
Yeah,
He said, I've never seen any protein like this in my life.
yeah.
And Adam Beal, what about him?
Yeah, I mean, I think Adam Beal cycled from the bottom of South America to Alaska to raise money for autism. Anyways, he told me like some days he wasn't eating and just having Immunocal, so he made it.
And Ingvar Mosley?
Yeah, so again, another athlete that came through our network that I was happy to support.
Very good. Bruno Langlois?
Another, he's on the world tour in cycling and a friend of mine. So again, we supported him for a while.
Ashley Maddox?
Yeah, another top athlete that is with Desai.
And of course, a famous one, Felicia
Yeah.
Dillard.
And again, trained under Desai, so we were able to supply her with product as well.
Nikita Holder.
Another one, yeah.
Priscilla Lope-Schleep. Carrie Ann Mitchell.
Those were all Desai's athletes. And again, this is interesting one that Douglas, if you look at that 154 pounds, he doesn't walk around at 154 pounds. So he's got to make that weight. And they put in, I mean, it's just insanity with the training they do. And so he told me that his Immunocal is what saved him in terms of preventing him from getting illness with all the training.
There's a story you shared with me too about someone in the hockey field who tended to lose a lot of muscle in the course of a season of hockey. What was his story?
Well, that's again, that goes to Dr. Droge's work. If you look at the blood of an AIDS patient, a cancer patient, overtrained athlete, patient with sepsis, they all have the same profile. They have low cysteine, low glutamine, and that's called the wasting syndrome. It's actually called the Droge syndrome, and that's it's not a nutrition problem, it's a catabolic problem. And so these athletes, like in the Tour de France, they can actually lose muscle mass. And that's what happens typically to hockey players over the course of a season. Because of all the energy they're expending, they lose muscle mass. So taking Immunocal just to stay even would be of benefit to these athletes.
Wow. Well, we know that Immunocal is a very unique product. It was actually the first time the physician's desk reference actually put it in their drug catalog. So it's been there for over 20 years. So we'd have to say that's very important for exercise and sports. John, if we put all this together, let's take an average person, not maybe someone with your background as an elite athlete, but somebody that they're in their 40s or 50s and 60s. How would Immunocal translate to a superb product for them?
Well, we're all focused on quality of life, and if you think about resiliency to all the different types of environmental influences that we're subjected to, and the fact that as we age, many important diseases occur later on in life. Dr. Bunos told me that's for a very important reason. It's the repeated exposure to all these different influences over time that degrade our health. So the earlier we can start on a product like Immunocal to essentially keep the body burden of toxins low, to keep our muscles strong, etc., that's going to improve the quality of the aging process. And so, after the fourth decade of life, there's some very profound changes that occur. And, in some segments of the population, you have what's called unhealthy aging, and we're actually studying unhealthy brain aging. And part of that unhealthy aging is the loss of muscle mass. So, in your 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s, you want to be able to do things that still are important to you. So whether it's playing golf, walking with your kids, gardening, whatever, those things can be compromised. And just like you have to take care of an asset like a car or a house, the human body responds to positive influences diet, exercise, and it also responds to negative influences, lack of exercise, poor diet, etc. And your body is very malleable and adaptable. So if you essentially create the environment that you live in that's full of these positive influences, your chances of enjoying a healthy elderly segment of your life are much better.
Well, those are some excellent comments. You just struck a chord there. We know that glutathione makes you healthier. And after this dissertation by yourself, I think we can say it makes you stronger. But recently, there's been some clinicals that have been coming out about the brain, including cognitive increase. What can you share about that?
Well, one of the things we didn't touch on for the sports performance is contact sports and the effect that contact sports has on the brain. And the way to think about that, it's not necessarily just concussions, it's what's called microtrauma. So even when these linemen meet in a football game, they're doing things to their brain. And we have a study that came out in concussions, a model of TBI, traumatic brain injury, where we showed that Immunocal reduced the inflammatory response to a concussion by essentially negating a 33% drop in glutathione in the brain that occurred after the concussion. So Immunocal normalized that. There was no drop. And then they measured behavior, they measured balance, motricity, and the mice were completely normal based on that. Now, the study you're referring to is really interesting. I explained that research at a certain point becomes a meritocracy. So I'll explain something. Early on when we started the company, Dr. Bunos had me read all these different articles. I read all his articles, all these different authors that he gave me. And one of the articles, or a group of articles, was by a researcher named Jenner, who talked about Immunocal neurodegenerative disease. So we had this hypothesis about how Immunocal may act to protect the brain, but we had no studies. And Dr. Bunos and I went to see this top neurologist at the Lady Davis Institute in Montreal to talk to him about Immunocal. And he was very nice, but he blew us off. You're not going to get us, you're not going to get me or the people that I work with to study Immunocal unless you have some proof. So about 10 years later, this physician who I stayed in touch with started doing experimental research on a model of schizophrenia. And he actually developed the model himself. And what was really interesting about this model of schizophrenia was he said, that what happens with these mice overexpress a protein that causes the essentially laying down of a lot of iron in the brain. And he says this is a model, even though these mice went on to develop schizophrenia, he says this is a model of what happens in neurodegenerative disease. So we're talking about oxidative stress, inflammation. And we ran an experiment where we gave Immunocal to these mice, and lo and behold, these mice didn't develop schizophrenia, and essentially it negated all the effects, even though these mice expressed this iron, that Immunocal, by boosting glutathione, was able to buffer this iron. So with this study, we were able to start this MCI study. Now, I have to preface this MCI study just to give you an idea of how important this is. When I was researching where to place this study, I decided to look at Immunocal and brain health, but brain health is kind of a subject that can mean many things to many people. So we had to settle on, what's the starting point for this? What's something that everybody can agree on? And the idea was that if we can show some progression in people that are diagnosed with MCI, that's as good as, talking about someone who is healthy and,
By the way, for
healthy.
some people don't know what MCI is.
Mild cognitive impairment.
Mild cognitive
Yeah,
impairment.
so
Yeah, please continue.
under the umbrella of dementia. So I went to sites in the US. In the US, I discovered this one site, this top university, and there's a a project that's running in the US called the Connectome Project. And this is $200 million project funded by the US government at multiple universities, where they're using imaging to look at how the brain's regions communicate with one another. And one of the byproducts of that is that they can now scan glutathione levels in the brain. So you can do it via imaging. And so that was really interesting to me. And then talking to this researcher, I found out that the neuro has the same capacity because they're getting a new MRI machine. And so we eventually did this study in Canada. And one of the people on this study is overseeing something similar. In Canada, there was $50 million given to a group of 14 university hospitals across Canada to study unhealthy brain aging. The president of that consortium is on the committee that's studying Immunocal and MCI, and the patients, the MCI patients, are coming from this pool of patients being studied under those 14 universities. So that's why I'm saying you never get to these people unless you have proof. And so it took us, about 4 years and a few $100,000 to generate the proof to be able to access these people, to be able to start the MCI study.
Very exciting, John. Very exciting. And, I appreciate that in spite of the dozens and dozens of clinicals that Immunotec has done over the years, they keep spending more money. They keep producing more of these trials. And to me, it just proves that we have the best product there is for glutathione.
Jim, it's not my good looks or your good looks that's got us here over 40 years, or Dr. Brunos's good looks. The thing that you have to understand is the way to look at these clinical studies and experimental studies. These are independent quality control data sets over the course of 40 years. So you've had a product that has performed over 40 years to get us to this point. In each of these studies, whether it's the study that we did with Dr. Shipper to look at the schizophrenic mice, or the concussed mice, or the LAND study, or the study Université de Montréal in elderly adults. I mean, in every study this product performs. So that says something about the quality of the product, but also the mechanism of action. The fact that you could have this over a 40-year period is pretty remarkable.
Well, John, I want to have you share something that you told me once. At the age of 40, when you were tested for your physiologically, what did they find out about you?
Well, this friend of mine who actually is now with this cycling team based in Israel and coaches a guy who's, I think he was third in the world championships. He was a 4.0 graduate at the University of McGill in physiology. And part of he presented a study on me to his class, and he tested me. He looked at my lactate threshold, and at the same time, he was testing the top male cyclist in Canada, who was 20 years old at the time. And we essentially tested out the same. So I was 40 years old, and I was tested in November, so I was not in shape because it was the end of the season. And my data was the same performance as his 20-year-old. He went and presented the data to his class. About, if you do what this guy does, you can have a healthy life as well.
That's very good, John. I'll share a story that I don't know if I told you, but when I gave a seminar in London about 10 years ago, one of the professors said, I'm very impressed with what you've said in this seminar. Could we test you on our new software? We have a software that we tests how old you are physiologically. Now, I didn't start at a young age taking Immunocal. I was 47 when I first started eating Immunocal, and I was almost 59 when I gave the seminar in London. So they hooked me up to this thing, and they had me breathe into something, and at the end of it, he said, well, you test at the age of 42 physiologically. And that meant I was 5 years younger than when I started eating it 12 years earlier. So I said, way to go. So, that proves that Immunocal, first of all, it makes you healthier. It can make you stronger. And now with these new studies, maybe makes you smarter. So I'd say that's a real triple knockout punch, John.
Yeah.